Martin Luther King Jr., born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia, emerged as one of the most transformative and inspiring figures of the 20th century. As a Baptist minister, he led the fight for civil rights, racial equality, and justice for African Americans in the United States, advocating a philosophy of nonviolence and love inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and his own Christian faith. Early life and family. Martin was born into a deeply religious family. His father, Martin Luther King Sr., was a reverend at Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, and his mother, Alberta Williams King, was a schoolteacher. Raised in a supportive and educated household, young Martin was instilled with the values of faith, dignity, and the importance of social justice from an early age. Despite growing up in the segregated South, where racial discrimination and Jim Crow laws were enforced, King's parents taught him self-respect and pride in his heritage. King was a gifted student, skipping 2 grades in high school and enrolling at Morehouse College at the age of 15. After graduating with a sociology degree in 1948, he entered Crozer Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, where he developed a deep interest in the concept of social justice, and learned about the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi, whose philosophy of nonviolent resistance would profoundly influence him. He later pursued a doctorate at Boston University, where he met his future wife, Coretta Scott, an intelligent and accomplished musician. They married in 1953 and had 4 children together. The Montgomery bus boycott. After completing his Ph.D., King became pastor of the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama. Shortly thereafter, in 1955, Rosa Parks, a black woman in Montgomery, refused to give up her bus seat to a white passenger. Parks' arrest sparked outrage in the black community, and civil rights leaders seized the opportunity to challenge segregation laws. They organized the Montgomery bus boycott, choosing the young and charismatic King to lead the campaign. King agreed, understanding the dangers and pressures that would come with his role but also seeing a calling for justice. The boycott, which lasted over a year, was brutal. King and other leaders faced arrests, harassment, and threats of violence. King's house was bombed, but he remained steadfast in his commitment to nonviolence. He urged supporters to remain peaceful in the face of hostility, understanding that a violent reaction could undermine the movement. Eventually, in 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional, marking a monumental victory for the civil rights movement and solidifying King's place as a leader of change. Founding the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. In 1957, King, along with other Southern black ministers, founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, to coordinate nonviolent protests and challenge segregation throughout the South. The SCLC promoted the belief that faith and activism were inseparable. King's leadership through the SCLC inspired others and gave momentum to civil rights campaigns across the country. Through the SCLC, King organized and participated in several significant events, including sit-ins, freedom rides, and boycotts. These nonviolent actions often met with hostility from local authorities and angry mobs. However, as these events were publicized, they drew widespread attention to the injustices faced by Black Americans and began to shift public opinion. The March on Washington, I Have a Dream. By 1963, the civil rights movement was gaining momentum, but progress was slow. To push for comprehensive civil rights legislation, King and other civil rights leaders organized the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. On August 28, 1963, over 250,000 people gathered on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. It was here that King delivered his historic "I Have a Dream" speech, a powerful vision of racial harmony, equality, and unity that remains one of the most famous speeches in American history. In his speech, King spoke of a future where people would be judged by the content of their character rather than the color of their skin. His words resonated with people across the country, galvanizing support for the movement. This moment put enormous pressure on Congress to pass meaningful civil rights legislation, which would come in the form of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Nobel Peace Prize and increasing advocacy. In 1964, at the age of 35, King became the youngest recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Rather than bask in personal accolades, he saw this recognition as a testament to the struggle of Black Americans and donated the prize money to the civil rights movement. However, as King continued his activism, he grew increasingly aware of the broader social injustices affecting not only Black Americans but also poor communities across racial lines. King shifted his focus toward issues of economic inequality and the Vietnam War. He viewed the war as a moral outrage and an economic drain on the government's ability to support social programs. His outspoken opposition to the Vietnam War drew criticism from many quarters, including the government and even some civil rights supporters who worried that this stance might alienate allies in Washington. The Poor People's Campaign in King's final days. In 1968, King launched the Poor People's Campaign, a campaign for economic justice that aimed to address the needs of America's impoverished citizens through better wages, affordable housing, and fair treatment. He believed that true equality could not be achieved without economic justice. To draw attention to this cause, he planned a massive march on Washington, D.C., to demand a revolution of values in American society. On April 3, 1968, King traveled to Memphis, Tennessee, to support a strike by Black sanitation workers protesting low wages and unsafe conditions. That evening, he gave his famous "I've Been to the Mountaintop" speech, where he eerily reflected on the possibility of an untimely death. The next evening, on April 4, King was assassinated while standing on the balcony of his hotel room at the Lorraine Motel. His assassination shocked the nation, triggering an outpouring of grief and widespread unrest. Legacy and lasting impact. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy endures through the enduring struggle for justice, equality, and peace. His philosophy of nonviolence and love continues to influence social movements around the world, from South Africa's anti-apartheid fight to modern social justice campaigns. The work King started eventually led to significant legislative changes, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. His dedication to social justice and equality inspired countless individuals to continue the fight for a more just and equitable world. Today, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is observed as a federal holiday in the United States, a day dedicated to his vision of unity, peace, and service to others. Martin Luther King Jr.'s life was marked by a profound commitment to social justice, faith, and an unshakable belief in the power of love and nonviolence. His journey from a young preacher in Atlanta to a Nobel Peace Prize laureate and a symbol of hope for millions exemplifies the strength and courage required to confront injustice and change the world. Here are some deeper insights. 1. Philosophy of nonviolence. King's commitment to nonviolence was a cornerstone of his activism, inspired by the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi and rooted in his Christian faith. He believed that love and peaceful resistance were the most powerful tools against oppression. King's 6 principles of nonviolence emphasized understanding, empathy, and forgiveness, even toward oppressors. He argued that nonviolence was not a method for cowards but required immense courage and discipline. His approach highlighted how nonviolence could dismantle systems of power by winning public sympathy and bringing moral pressure on authorities to enact change. 2. The role of faith and the Black Church. King's leadership was deeply rooted in his faith and his role as a Baptist minister. The Black Church was not just a place of worship, it was a crucial institution in the fight for civil rights. It provided a strong community, a source of spiritual strength, and a network for organizing protests. King's sermons combined the moral teachings of Christianity with a call for justice, weaving together a powerful message of hope, resilience, and resistance against injustice. His faith gave him the courage to face incredible risks, and his sermons inspired countless people to join the movement. 3. The Letter from Birmingham Jail. One of King's most significant writings, A Letter from Birmingham Jail, was penned in 1963 after he was arrested during a nonviolent protest in Birmingham, Alabama. In this letter, he responded to white clergy who had criticized his actions as unwise and untimely. King argued that African Americans could no longer wait for the right time for justice, as their rights were continually delayed. He explained the need for constructive, nonviolent tension to force society to confront racism. The letter became a defining document in the civil rights movement and a powerful articulation of King's philosophy on civil disobedience. 4. Impact on the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Voting Rights Act of 1965. King's activism, particularly his leadership in events like the March on Washington, played a crucial role in swaying public opinion and political leaders. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 were landmark achievements that aimed to dismantle legal segregation and protect Black Americans' voting rights. The passage of these laws marked major victories for the movement, but King continued to work tirelessly to address broader issues of economic injustice and inequality. 5. His growing focus on economic justice. As King's vision for equality grew, he began addressing economic issues, which he believed were fundamental to achieving true equality. He saw that poverty affected people across racial lines and understood that economic disparities were deeply rooted in systemic injustices. This shift in focus led to the Poor People's Campaign, where King planned a massive demonstration in Washington, D.C., to demand better wages, housing, and fair treatment for America's poor. His commitment to economic justice showed his understanding that civil rights were interconnected with economic opportunity. 6. Opposition to the Vietnam War. King's opposition to the Vietnam War was a bold stance that came with great personal and political risk. He believed that the war was morally wrong, disproportionately affected poor communities, and took resources away from social programs needed to address inequality. King's stance against the war led to backlash from allies who feared it would harm the civil rights movement's relationship with the federal government. However, King remained steadfast, believing that he couldn't advocate for justice at home while ignoring injustice abroad. 7. Legacy beyond his death. Even after his assassination in 1968, King's influence continued to grow. His life became a model for those fighting for justice worldwide. From anti-apartheid activists in South Africa to advocates for economic justice and LGBTQ rights in the United States. His writings, speeches, and philosophy have been incorporated into curricula across the globe, and Martin Luther King Jr. Day is celebrated as a national holiday in the United States. This day serves not only to remember him but also as a call for continued service and action to realize his dream of a fair and equal society. 8. Influence on future movements. King's emphasis on the power of nonviolent protest has influenced many modern social justice movements. His tactics, like marches, sit-ins, and civil disobedience, have become the blueprint for activists fighting for causes like racial justice, environmental protection, and human rights. His belief in the power of collective action and moral persuasion endures, as people across the world continue to invoke his teachings in the struggle for justice. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy reminds us that standing up to injustice requires not just courage, but also compassion and empathy. His life serves as a testament to the impact that one person's dedication to justice can have on the world, encouraging future generations to keep fighting for a more just and equitable society.